certain novels become ubiquitous in public imagination. Anyone who's paid any attention to pop culture in the age of Trump and post the American abortion ruling will probably have seen someone at some point make a reference to The Handmaid's Tale. In many places across the world, the image of a woman with a red dress and a white winged headpiece has become a symbol of protest against the erosion of women's rights. It's in this context, and in the wake of a popular TV show adaptation, that Atwood has decided to return to the world of The Handmaid's Tale. People were kind of anxious. We'd already seen a sequel to a legacy novel that features social justice not go so well in Go Set a Watchman. My name's Eddie, this is the last of my 12 video series on the major works of Margaret Atwood. Let's talk about Testaments. Was it worth coming back to? Let's find out. The Testaments is likely set some years after the events of The Handmaid's Tale. The book is set in Gilead, a religiously run state in which fertile women are forced to act as surrogates or handmaids for the wealthy and infertile commander class. Rather than focusing on these handmaids, this novel broadens out our perspective. It features 3 different narrators. The first is Aunt Lydia, a powerful woman in Gilead who was in charge of the instruction of the handmaids. She speaks directly to the reader, having been writing her story down in secrecy. Whilst aunts are allowed to read and write, in contrast to the majority of women in Gilead, the things that she's writing are treasonous, and there's kind of no privacy in this state. Lydia, it turns out, was a judge in her pre-Gilead life. After being tortured and being put into solitary confinement, Lydia realises that her best chance of survival is to cooperate with her captors, and even takes part in a kind of mass killing of the intellectual classes, including someone that she was colleagues with when she was a judge. She does this in return for becoming one of the founding members of the Aunts, who are based in Ardua Hall. She quickly establishes herself in a dominant position over the other aunts, including Aunt Elizabeth, Aunt Helena, and Aunt Vidala, who's a true believer in the cause. And Lydia is able to shape the way in which handmaids are taught. She describes to us how she's playing the long game, slowly gathering incriminating information before she's eventually going to use that in order to bring down the state. She's helped create the cult of the baby Nicole, a girl who was stolen away from Gilead at a young age, and whose portrait hangs alongside hers and the other aunts in every classroom in Gilead. Kind of a creepy baby worship going on there. The 2 other narrators are Agnes Jemima and Daisy, 2 girls growing up in different parts of the world who are referred to in this narrative as witness testimony 369A and 369B. Agnes lives in Gilead. Her father is a commander, Commander Kyle, and her mother tells her how she picked her at a young age. She has vague memories of being in the woods, maybe, when she was picked up by her mother Tabitha. Her mother, however, is sick and dies when Agnes is in her early teens. Carl remarries a woman named Paula, who Agnes does not get on with at all. Paula immediately sets her up to go to preparatory school in order to get married to a wealthy commander named Commander Judd. But Daisy, on the other hand, grows up in Canada, outside of the influence of Gilead. We see her life as almost normal. She can read, she can write, she can wear trousers, she can do all those things that regular girls love to do. She helps her family run a second-hand clothes shop. The Pearl Girls are sort of missionary group that head over to Canada in order to convince young women to go to Gilead, frequently visit the shop and leave their leaflets there. Daisy kind of notices this and is like, what's going on there? Because she knows that her mother is not at all a fan of Gilead, but her mother says, you know, look, we gotta hear them out, we gotta take their leaflets. Daisy goes so far as to go to an anti-Gilead protest in strong defiance of her parents' wishes. Her parents are then killed in a bombing attack by agents of Gilead, and Daisy is rescued by Mayday, an agency responsible for rescuing women from Gilead, and it turns out that her parents were both a part of this organisation. Agnes's Gilead-based life is harsh. She's assaulted by her dentist, who was essentially kept on in his job because a good dentist is hard to find in Gilead, and the daughter of said dentist, her friend Becca, tries to kill herself rather than be forced to be married to one of the commanders, and instead she gets to train to become an aunt. One day, Agnes is told that Aunt Lydia is there to talk to her. Lydia tells her that Agnes should say that her own calling is to be an aunt, knowing that Commander Judd's wives are not long for this world. Judd goes so far as to actually ask Lydia to kill one of his wives in the novel, which is a lot. Agnes does say that she wants to become an aunt and is christened Aunt Victoria. In the meantime, Daisy finds out in a plot twist that she's the baby Nicole. What? She's a celebrity! She's brought back into Gilead on a special mission, pretending to be a homeless girl who's then picked up by the Pearl Girls with the aim of getting information from a mole who's inside of Gilead. Lydia, the mole, has arranged this and organises it so that Daisy stays in Agnes's room. Lydia then reveals to the two of them that they're sisters. She injects a microdot, a kind of cache of information, into Nicole's arms, and then sends the two of them back across the border. The girls are smuggled out of Gilead by Mayday. Lydia, who Commander Judd knows has now lost Nicole, is on limited time with enemies both inside and outside of Ardua Hall. She smuggles 2 drops of morphine, knowing that she may need to use them to commit suicide when the time is right. Finally, as critical information about Gilead's operation is leaked in Canada, the 2 girls wake up to find that they've been reunited with their mother. Before we get on to discussing the testament, I just want to read you out the definition of a testament. A tangible proof or tribute. B, an expression of conviction. 2A, an act by which a person determines the disposition of his or her property after death. And archaic, a covenant between God and the human race. Just keep those in mind when we're talking about the novel, and we'll circle back to it later. When taking a look at the Testament, I think it's important to look at how this book builds on the messages of The Handmaid's Tale and kind of broadens them out. That book, which focuses quite intensely on one character, Offred's perspective, kind of displays how Gilead works on an individual level. Yes, we get glimpses of society's broader structures, but only that, glimpses. What the Testaments does is takes that and widens it out to a bigger world over a longer period of time. Firstly, we get a glimpse into the internal lives of other people in society, particularly looking at the way in which children grow up in a world like this. Agnes and her friend Becca are to an extent indoctrinated into this system, but are constantly fighting against it and its limits, whether they realise it or not. Atwood is giving us a glimpse once again into the mundanity, but also the horror of a stringent, religiously run state. For individual children, the experience of growing up is horrible. As Agnes's friend states, no one wants to die, but some people don't want to live in any of the ways that are allowed. Agnes's father is emotionally distant from her, but this is to be expected. Men literally sequester themselves into their own private offices where they have complete control of what's going on. These are spaces that we've seen in The Handmaid's Tale where all kinds of private abuses can be carried out. But we also get a further glimpse into the way in which women are able to take further control over their lives in Gilead. Yes, mainly through Aunt Lydia, but also through Agnes's stepmother, for example. Everyone is kind of pitying her for her husband having been killed by a handmaid. But it turns out that actually, maybe she was the one that killed her husband and framed the handmaid. In a world in which women's agency has been forcibly limited, Atwood is showing us the kind of new dynamics that would form between women. We also take a look at the underpinning of the state, the kind of tools that they're using in order to stay in power. We see the centrality of the baby Nicole as a kind of symbol that's used to unite both the infertile mothers and the handmaids forced to conceive in a kind of collective anger against the outside world that is therefore not directed at the state. We also get a glimpse of the outside world, including Canada. They're now shown to have a neighbour to the south with politically regressive policies surrounding women's own choices to give birth. Yeah, so quite different to the current situation. Interestingly, we also get a look at what the handmaid system looks like to the non-handmaid Gilead characters in the novel. And honestly, they don't come up that much. Agnes kind of hears a horror story of a birthing party, and occasionally a handmaid will be mentioned in the novel. But other than that, they just kind of don't seem to impact all that much on the day-to-day life of many of the characters, which is kind of horrifying in itself, Another theme that's worth looking at in the novel is the use of knowledge. Lydia gains her power throughout the novel through having access to knowledge that other characters don't have. Whether she's using a camera that she's put inside her own statue, which is hilarious, to see what the other aunts are up to, or whether she is using her knowledge about Paula's murder of her husband in order to get Agnes out of her household, it's kind of shown that Aunt Lydia is fully in control of her situation because of what she knows. Lydia is only able to get agency over her situation because she's one step ahead of everyone else. And Lydia is only able to be one step ahead of everyone else because she knows more. She uses this knowledge sparingly when it comes to Agnes, kind of drip feeding her information about both the horrors of Gilead and her own personal family situation in order to kind of prepare her and soften her up for the mission that she's going to have her do. Agnes, on the other hand, is helpless in this situation, desperate to learn more, but without any of the tools that she needs in order to process the information that's being given to her. Ardua Hall gains its power through this access to knowledge. It's the only place where women can read and write. It has access to forbidden books, which no other women are allowed to read, and crucially, it's the only place where, as a woman, you're allowed to read the Bible in its entirety. The selective use of knowledge keeps women restrained in Gilead, and the gaining of knowledge allows characters such as Agnes to slowly gain their own sense of identity, to gain flexibility in what they want to do. A lack of shared knowledge is also a big barrier in this novel to human conversation. Lydia bemoans that both young women in her time, as well as young women reading her text in the future, can't possibly understand what it is that she's been through. They didn't have to live through the harshness of the start of Gilead. They're only there to kind of either judge what's come afterwards or are part of the system, have never lived outside of it. Neither group are truly able, Lydia says, to comprehend her actions. Agnes and Nicole are even separated by their lexicon. They're unable to truly understand each other. Nicole's slang means absolutely nothing to Agnes. She says, "Suck it up," and she's like, "What are you talking about, mate?" Agnes even states in the novel that she's aware that when they go to Canada, she's leaving her own area in which she understands language, understands the way the world works, to an area where only Nicole is keyed in. So, given all that we've talked about with knowledge and control, I want to swing us back to the definitions that I stated at the start of this thematic analysis. Atwood, throughout her career, is clear that narratives are always constructed and should never be fully trusted. We've seen this again and again, most notably in Alias Grace, and this is also true of these testaments. Is what Lydia says in this novel a statement of truth, a statement of conviction, a statement of belief and kind of connection between her and God, a covenant, or something else entirely? In the symposium, after the main story, this gets highlighted. The symposium, our old friend. The 13th symposium, the direct follow-up to the 12th symposium at the end of A Handmaid's Tale, adds a bit of levity into our proceedings. Atwood expands her skewering of academia from that text into a kind of skewering of the pop culturification of trauma and traumatic history. Professor Crescent Moon kindly reminds everyone not to get carried away by the reenactment of Gilead and the Handmaids, which they did at the last symposium. And the public are invited to take part in a recreational hymn singing from the Gilead era. Oh, doesn't that sound fun? This tragic historical period, never more popular in Atwood's narrative, has been turned into a kind of series of interesting curios for tourists. Likewise, our old friend Professor Piagiotto is once again joking about the narrative, this time about how Professor Crescent Moon got promoted and that would never happen in Gilead, and also complaining that the two young girls didn't date their narratives. Very selfish of them. Hey, at least he gets more information about the leadership of Gilead this time. What a treat for him, although maybe he's a bit annoyed that it's one of the women and not one of the fascinating commanders. He also delivers what feels like quite a targeted barb from Atwood, stating that the young are idealistic, have an underdeveloped sense of their own morality, and are afflicted with this exaggerated thirst for justice. This again mocks Piagiotto's kind of historical objectivity. Darn these youths and their over-exaggerated thirst for justice. The symposium also highlights a big question about our narrators. How far are their statements, their testaments, to be relied on? And how do we take into account this historical distance? Aunt Lydia's story, labelled the Ardua Hall monograph, could easily be a fabrication made by Aunt Elizabeth or Aunt Vidala to kind of discredit her. But I think the more interesting take is to look at it as an expression of conviction and also as one of justification for her actions after her death. Lydia stores her work in Cardinal Newman's Apologia, which is itself a religious defense of belief. And that's what this text is too. It tries to convince the future that the way that she acted not only is the only way she could have acted to survive, but it's also the best thing that she could have done for Gilead. So the question naturally follows, do we believe her? Her motivation is essentially provided as A, find a way to survive, B, gain as much influence as possible, and C, eventually bring down Gilead from the inside. She displays herself in the most part as a victim of this system, but as Sophie Gilbert notes, there is ample reason to be cynical about the way that Lydia is presenting her story. When discussing her statue, she states, "Only dead people are allowed to have statues. but I have been given one while still alive. Already I am petrified. She's concerned that she's already been judged and found lacking by the women of the future. She is, as Gilbert notes, literally like a statue, set in stone. So the question that Atwood is asking here is that in our attempt to give agency and voice to all women of the past, regardless of their actions, who is it that we're at risk of redeeming? Should someone who's given so much pain out to women in her own time be given this shot at redemption, be given the chance to tell her own story? Worth saying as a side note, this symposium also refers to the idea that, as the reader may have come to believe, both Agnes and Nicole are the children of Offred, June from the first novel. That presumably Nicole is Nick and June's child, and presumably Agnes is June's older child. But as the professor warned, we shouldn't get carried away by speculation, as fun as it is. Nonetheless, it does feel like Atwood is providing at least the hope of a happy ending in this novel, something that's different to the ambiguous ending of The Handmaid's Tale. Maybe she felt like we needed more hope. Just before we finish off this video and this series, I want to reflect on one of the broader points surrounding the Testaments, and that is, was this novel necessary? Do I believe that the broadening out of Gilead, that the answering of some of the questions that we had in the first novel was something that was important, something that was needed? It's difficult to answer, but I lean towards no. To me, one of the strongest parts of The Handmaid's Tale is the unsaid. I don't think that the glimpse we get into Aunt Lydia's internal workings and her complicity in the system is all that groundbreaking here. Yes, her bogeyman status as kind of this force of nature in Gilead is complicated by this picture in an interesting way. But is it one that we needed? I'm not convinced that Atwood's analysis of the theme of complicity here is any more effective than in her other work, for example, Cat's Eye. Centering the story on the deeply personal, like with Offred, especially when there is so much that she couldn't see outside of her vision, was a far more effective form of storytelling in my mind. Having an almost omniscient Lydia in this novel who is incapable of making a misstep feels like a very different beast. There was a real tension in Offred's relationship with the commander, with her world as a whole. I didn't feel that at all here. The Handmaid's Tale is an important and influential text in recent literary history. It did a lot to mainstream this kind of model of gender-based dystopia that's currently popular in fiction. And indeed, Gilead definitely hasn't lost its potency in the 2010s, but it has lost its novelty. If you take this book for what it is, a more typical example of kind of modern gender-based dystopian fiction, then it's enjoyable. But I'd argue it's not revolutionary in the way that The Handmaid's Tale was. And I guess that's fine. Not everything has to be revolutionary. So I don't know where that leaves me. But I don't think it's one of Atwood's strongest works to finish on. Thank you for watching my series. I'm done. It's been a year. I'm not sure what's next for this channel. I think I'm unlikely to jump into another writer straight away, especially not one with as many books as Margaret Atwood. So I'll kind of see what's coming next. Let me know if you want to see more books in this style, or kind of discussions that don't have spoilers in, or videos of a different sort entirely. I'm very keen to experiment. I want to try some new stuff, and yeah, we'll see what the rest of this year brings us. Alright, thanks guys. Thanks Margaret Atwood. Thanks to the Academy. I'll see you. Goodbye.